Good night, everyone. Tonight, my speech is on Edgar Allan Poe. I'm here to inform you about the birth, the struggles, and the accomplishment and mysterious death that surrounded Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, poet, editor, and literary critic. Poe was best known for poetry, short stories, and tales of Maccabee. Poe's work has been and continues to this day to be used in the 6th to 12th grade. We as adults have also in one time to the next been intrigued with the tales of the supernatural. This was the mysterious mind of Edgar Allan Poe. His tale, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, in 1841 initiated the modern detective story, and the atmosphere in his tales of horror in unrevealed in American fiction. His most famous poem, The Raven, in 1845, has been best known in national literature. Many of us have at least read some interesting or suspense thriller book, or even stood in the lines because we wanted to see a great scary story. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston. This is the same year Thomas Jefferson was president in the United States. 1 year later, his parents were separated. A year later, his mother dies when he was just 2 years old, and he was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Allan. At age 6, Edgar goes to school in England. By the age 11, he returns to the United States. Later at age 14, he succeeded in athletics. At the age of 17, he attended University of Virginia. Here, he did well in Latin and French, but he started drinking very heavily. This went on, and then he became well in debt due to a lot of gambling losses. Because of this, his foster parents had cut him off. By the age of 18, he dropped out of school. He then published a pamphlet of youthful poems, Tamerlane and other poems. At the age of 19, Edgar then joins the army, where he attains rank of sergeant. His stepdad, Mr. Allan, finally reconciles with him. Poe then published a new volume, Al-Alfaraf, Tamerlane and Minor Poems. He then goes to West Point, where his stepdad sponsored him. He realized this was not the life he wanted, so he deliberately was kicked out of West Point. By the age 23, he went to New York City. This is where he had some of his poetry published. He submitted stories to a number of magazines, but they all were rejected. He desperately reached out to Mr. Allan, asking for help once more time, but none was given. At the age of 25, Mr. Allan dies, leaving none of his inheritance to Poe. A year later, Poe wins a contest for the manuscript found in the bottle. He finally gets a job. He then goes to marry his cousin Virginia, who was at that time just 13 years old. As an editor for the Southern Literary Messenger, Poe successfully managed the paper, but despite this, he soon left due to poor salary. 2 years later, he wrote Ligeia and the Haunted Palace. His first volume of short stories, he received 20 copies, but no money. Poe found work as an editor for Graham's magazine. During the 2 years, he published his detective story. This was the first detective story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. He continued to write Eleonora, A Descent into the Macedon. He then left and wanted to start his magazine, The Stylus. He began to write The Gold Bug, which had a circulation of 300,000 copies, but yet he could barely make a living. He then moved into a small cottage near what is now 192nd Street. But Virginia's health was declining. She was fading away, and he started to fall into depression all over again. He continues to write The Pit and the Pendulum, The Telltale Heart. In 1945, Poe wrote one of his most famous poems, The Raven. Virginia died 10 days after his 38th birthday. He continued to write, but also his drinking took over, and all the debt that has already surrounded his life. Poe continues to write Hop Frog and more. He leaves New York City and visits John Sutton in Philadelphia. 2 weeks later, he goes to Richmond and stays in the Swan Tavern Hotel. He then joins what is called the Son of Temperance in an effort to stop his drinking. Poe then leaves Richmond and goes back to Philadelphia. Apparently, he gets on the wrong train and goes to Baltimore. Poe is found half conscious and taken to Washington College Hospital. After 4 days, he died mysteriously. No one to this day knows exactly what caused his death. Today, Edgar Allan Poe continues to live on in schools for his mystery in poetry and short stories. The raven motif has been used in an episode of The Simpsons. Poe was also mentioned in the lyrics of the Beatles song I Am the Walrus. Movies The Pit and the Pendulum, Murders in Rue Morgue were considered to be the best adaptations in 1932 and 1961. The Raven considered to be the most famous poem to date, used in schools. His legacy lives on long after Edgar Allan Poe had died.